Let's actually put these in order so that we can actually pretend that we're organized and together. Hashtag shitty YouTuber. Should that just be my official hashtag for the channel? Hashtag shitty YouTuber. Oh Lord. All right. I'm losing my mind. Hi guys, we are back with another one. I am so excited to be doing another wrap up. This one's going to be a little bit short, but I will explain why. I actually had a really solid reading month. This was the first official month that my reads were based off of my random spinning TBR wheel, and it was 100% a success. It really was. I had such a fun reading month, picking up a perfect mixture of books that I probably would have prioritized, and other books that have been like sitting on my shelves for months and months that I at some point would have picked up, but would I have prioritized them for last month? Probably not. And that's so awesome because it really pushes you to read things outside of just picking up like a handful of books that you're prioritizing. So that's great. I did have a really good month. I didn't get back to my 6 to 8 book average. I did read a total of 5 books in the month of September, which is not horrible. I've said this in every single video. I lead a very chaotic and very busy life. That is not all about me and my time. It is also about 2 very active little boys, a husband, running a household, working my other job. I am a realtor in my other off YouTube life. So working my other job, running around, being basically a glorified Uber for 2 very active little boys who play a lot of sports, and I would not have it any other way. So this is not complaining. This is just explaining that having, a 6 to 8 book month is not always possible, or even certainly more. Having a 20 book month is probably just not something I'm going to have because I'm not always in control of my own time. I feel like my time is very much always somebody else's, which is great. But this is more to say, comparison is the thief of joy. I also watch a ton of YouTubers on YouTube, and I wish that I could read more, or sometimes I find myself watching them and saying, like, why don't I read 30 books a month? Like, maybe if I just set aside more time. But the reality is, I don't even have enough time to set aside to do that, and that's okay. We all have different lives, and some months are going to be better months than others. I am very pleased with 5 this month. I honestly did not even think I was going to have time to read 2. So the fact that I got to 5 is blowing my expectations out of the water. So never ever put pressure on yourself to read as much as or as little as somebody else. Read what's right for you. And as long as you're reading, it's a win. So I did read this month, and let's talk about what I read in the month of September. Okay, so the first book I went into off of my Spin Wheel TBR was my Kindle pick, which was none other than The Hunger Games. Like I've said in a couple of my other videos, I am 35, so I feel as though I kind of missed the Hunger Game hype. I was like still a little bit older. I was in my more like mid to older adolescence when this came out. I was very much more like the Harry Potter generation. This was just slightly younger than I was. By the time the Hunger Games came out, I was already fully invested in Harry Potter. I was the Harry Potter generation, and the Hunger Games kind of never entered my radar at the time that it was popular. I actually have only seen, I think, like the first half of the first movie too. So when I went into this, I did go into this a lot blinder, I think, a lot more blindly than a lot of other people would. I honestly did not know much except for like the very basic premise of what the movie covered. If you are just like me and you didn't know, the very brief synopsis of this book is that it follows our female main character, Katniss, who lives in this semi-dystopian world after the United States as we know it has fallen. And basically the United States now is broken up into 12 districts, which are all different levels of caste and social hierarchy. Each district also has something that they basically specialize in. There's like a coal district, a wheat district, a jewel district. And then at the height of the social hierarchy is the capital, which is the basically capital city that houses and cares for the elites. And the 12 districts basically use their specialties to supply the capital and the elites. And I believe it's once a year, but basically once you hit 12, you are entered into this pool to take part in these Hunger Games, which chooses one female and one male tribute from each of the 12 districts to compete in essentially this brutal reality show that's broadcasted to all the districts and the capital to entertain the capital and the districts. And it's basically just a battle royale to the death, where the last one who survives gets a ton of rewards for their family as well as their district as a whole. And basically the general premise of what happens is Katniss's little sister is chosen, her beloved little sister, her prized little sister, really the person who means the most to her in the world, is chosen as the female tribute for their district. And Katniss sacrifices herself into the Hunger Games so that her sister doesn't have to go. And what happens from there? I have to be honest with you, I gave this book a 4.25 stars. It was surprisingly good for me. The storyline was solid. It was non-stop. I mean, it's like something is happening in every single chapter. The world was well developed. The games were well developed. So you really honestly got super involved in the story. It kept you interested non-stop. I really, really enjoyed my time. I really connected to Katniss as a character. I liked her. She was like the perfect mixture of like badass, but also relatable. She definitely had walls up, but she was so compassionate and caring about her family and the people that she loved that you really found yourself rooting for her. Like you worried about her while she was going through these like brutal trials and games. The only reason why it was a 4.25 and not a 4.5, 4.75, or certainly 5 stars, was that the writing and the dialogue were a little young. And I know that that might come across as a little bit of an unfair rating because you're sitting there being like, it's a YA book. The dialogue's supposed to be young. But this was marketed for ages like 12 to 17. And sometimes the dialogue got a little cringy even for that age range, I think. Also, there were parts where the story got just a little bit not predictable. I don't want to say predictable because it was relatively randomized, but it did get it dragged a little bit for me. So it was really surprising. It was the first book in a series that I'm absolutely going to continue. I am going to go on to Catching Fire, I think, which is the next book in the series. I'm really excited where it goes from here because she's already, competed and what's going to happen after that. So I do say, if you are like me and you are an older person who hasn't read The Hunger Games and it kind of skipped your demographic at this point, go into it with an open mind. Go into it expecting it to read a little bit young because that is its target demographic. And you're going to have a really good time because it was definitely entertaining. So Hunger Games, 4.25. I will be continuing on with the series. Okay, so let's pull up our Goodreads and talk about what the next book I read was. The next book I went into was The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This is gripping. Gripping. Like, let's just get the rating right out of the way. This was a 4.5 stars. I have said this in multiple videos. I have a complicated relationship with thriller mysteries, okay? It's not always my favorite genre, and I am super, super hypercritical of thriller mysteries because of that. But that being said, this is the closest I've ever come to rating a thriller mystery 5 stars. It was a 4.5. It didn't quite get there, but I have never gotten that close where several times during the reading of this book, I did put the book down and think, is this going to be a 5 stars? Like, am I getting 5-star vibes? And although it never ended up getting there, the fact that it got that close, it says something. This is a solid solid book. And if you are like me and you find yourself being hypercritical or rolling your eyes at some unbelievable elements of most thriller mysteries, or having trouble connecting to the story just because they're so far-fetched and over the top, I think that you should pick this up and try to read it. It definitely does have parts that still are a little over the top, but keep in mind it's not real life. It is a fictional book, but it is compellingly realistic. And I actually floated this in my other, I forget what it was like my reading for 24 hours, I think, vlog when I read this. Is there anybody else out there that feels like you might even perhaps be able to categorize this as like a mini horror? Like, not full-blown horror, but it has horror elements in it for sure. If you are like super squeamish and horror isn't your thing, I think that you could still do this, because like I said, it's kind of horror light. I think you could still do this, but it definitely, in my opinion, for someone who's not a necessarily hardcore horror reader, I think that this is probably the closest to horror I've come. So basically, if you haven't heard of this book, this follows a character who is going through some tough times in life, and she's staying at this very remote cabin cottage near the water, and she is using her time while she's there enriching herself by reading a lot of books. And she happens to be recommended this book and reads it and absolutely hates it. Hates this book. So she goes on to essentially what is like review sites, like a Goodreads or a review site, and she leaves a 1-star review. And in her review, I think she even says, like, if I could leave this 0 stars, I would. And she really just goes in on this author and this book. She really hated it. She didn't hold back. And the author basically responds and essentially says, like, people like you are the problem. You don't support writers and authors. You don't support the arts. Take this, basically like, take this review down or else. And she doesn't. So what happens from there is honestly freaky, and this book legitimately got me. I was reading this book and checking over my shoulders, had to take my headphones off because I was afraid I wouldn't hear a killer sneaking up behind me. And so it definitely freaked me out. It gave me the heebie-jeebies. It was very good. And like I said, if you are like me and you have a complicated relationship with thriller mysteries that just don't always, it's not always a genre that works out for you, I think you might want to try this one because it was really good and it was really creepy and it came pretty close to thriller perfection for me. So, The Last Word by Taylor Adam, 4.5 stars. So after that freaky book, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and continue on with my TBR. So I picked up The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. I was over the moon when the wheel picked this book because I have really wanted to venture into Carissa Broadbent for so long. I don't know if you can see it, but over here, this stack is my Carissa Broadbent stack. I essentially own her total life's work, and I have just never delved into it. And full disclosure, this is a thick book. It's a beautifully floppy paperback, but it's a thick book, and the writing is relatively tiny. And I just feel as though I was intimidated by Carissa as an author, but also picking up this book, how much of a series I'm committing myself to. I don't know why, but that's something that sometimes really intimidates and discourages me from big series, from big authors that have such a cult following. But I have to be honest with you guys, I am so pleasantly surprised I picked this up because I ended up rating this a 4.5 stars as well. This was such a solid romantasy. However, I feel as though genres have subplots, subcategories, and the romance was not the central plot in this book. I honestly remember reading it and I feel like we didn't even get like a hint of real concrete flirtation for like 2/3 through the book. It does have a happy enemies to lovers trope, and also just like trials and games. So for anyone who wants a brief synopsis of this, This book is about our main character, and I'm so bad with names. What is her name? Oriah. Our main character, Oriah, who was found by a horde or a community of vampires when they were pillaging her human village. And for some reason, the vampire king that was destroying and rampaging her village sees something in her, and instead of killing her or, leaving her to the humans, he decides to take her and basically adopt her as his daughter. And I think from the beginning, as a reader, you're kind of like, why? Like, you kind of have a sense that there has to be something more to that story. Like, of all the people he sees, of all the humans he kills and encounters, like, what was so special about Oriah that he held on to her and adopted her as something so personal as his daughter? And basically the way this world works is there is a god system, and the particular god that wards over their section of the world puts on a series of trials where the winner gets to have any wish that they want granted. And obviously Oriah has a wish that is very much life and death for her, and if she wins these trials and gets her wish granted, it changes the course of her life that she's living and she has been raised in this world. So it's very important to her. So she enters this trial as a tribute, and basically what happens from there, her relationships with the other trial members, how the trial ends up playing out, and whether or not she gets her wish at the end. And then, throughout the trials, does what she is hoping for change? Does her priorities evolve? Does she meet anyone? It's really, really great. And the element of her as a human interacting with this like powerful vampire world is really interesting. The writing is beautiful. What I absolutely loved about this book is there's little to no world building at all. So you kind of just are thrown directly into this story, and you're left to fill in the blanks of the world by yourself. And for anyone who watches my videos and isn't a common or a voracious fantasy or romantasy reader, I know the number one thing that really criticizes people, or that is the largest criticism, I should say, is that the world building is very complicated, confusing, and intimidating. And this book, it subverts that. You don't have to worry about that. You could pick this up and read this and love it. I really think the writing is, I hate this phrase, but I really think the writing is very digestible and easy. So 4.5 stars. The only reason why I couldn't go higher was I think this book could have been shorter. There were sections that, at least at this point, like I said, I do have her works. I do have the second book and the novella for this series. So I could end up reading those and updating this opinion. But at least at this point, there were sections of this book that you read through and kind of wondered why it had to be in this book. It didn't really seem relevant. But I did overall very much enjoy my time. 4.5 stars. Definitely, if you're looking for a book to get you into fantasy, Carissa Broadbent's writing is masterful. So after Carissa Broadbent, I picked up Love in the Time of Serial Killers by Alicia Thompson. This is a roughie. I gave this book 2.5 stars, and I know that seems harsh, but 2.5 stars on a scale of 0 to 5 is average. And that is the best way I could describe this book. This book is perfectly average. So this book follows Phoebe Walsh, the female main character, who is going through, once again, a little bit of a hard time, and her father passes away, so she decides to move into her childhood home to clean out the home, to get it ready to put on the market after her father's death. And she ends up interacting with the next door neighbor of her father's home, and basically from the jump just randomly decides that this guy is a serial killer. She is true crime obsessed. She's a PhD candidate in criminology, writing her thesis on serial killers and mass murders and things like that, and basically forensic psychology. And basically just decides that this next door neighbor is a serial killer, and where it goes from there. There's so much to say about this book because that concept just seems so interesting. Like, I was into it. I actually thought I was really going to like this. And the writing was more or less okay. It's very simple writing, which is not a criticism. I like it. And coming off of a heavy fantasy or something like that, sometimes this is a really, really nice departure and a break where you don't have to focus too much on it. However, it fell flat in several departments for me. I did not find this main character, Phoebe, likable at all. Like, she and I just had serious connection issues. I found her, I guess like the word I would use for it is I found her delusional. Like, she was just straight up delusional in a lot of parts, way overly paranoid to the point where like it wasn't enjoyable to read, and I just had trouble rooting for her and connecting with her. And I think my biggest criticism of this book was that it was just kind of boring. Like, 300 and something pages and nothing really happens. I mean, I guess you explore her relationships with the people in her life a little bit, but like, I don't want to give away too much. So what I'm going to do is I am going to say something now that's a little bit of a spoiler. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a timestamp right here up on the screen that tells you where to skip to if you think you might be interested in reading this and you don't want anything spoiled. It's not that big of a deal, but like, I don't like having anything spoiled. So go ahead and skip to this timestamp if you do not want to hear this. So I'm going to give it in 3, 2, 1. Okay. The male main character isn't a killer. She's literally delusional the whole time. That's the way this book ends. That he's not a killer and she falls in love with him. So you read 330 something pages of her making these huge assumptions about this guy, seemingly out of nowhere. Like, oh my God, he's a neighbor that came out and helped me carry a desk. He definitely murders people. And you're going, girl, what? Like, huh? Like, or he's just really nice and he sees a single woman out there looking at a Victorian roll top desk and he wants to help you carry it. Like, just delulu to another level and paranoid to another level. And just some of the stuff she says and does, like, it's just, if I were this neighbor, I'd be really offended. I would be like, girl, you crazy. Like, don't come over here anymore. Like, I don't know what your deal is, but don't involve me. Okay? And then you read this entire book and you're kind of bored because there's really nothing happen other than this girl's delusions. And it gets to the point during this book that you almost hope, like, you're reading these chapters of her being like, I'm going to watch him through the windows. He comes and goes really late at night. Something must be up with that. So I'm watching for his headlights in his driveway. Oh, he's coming out of his garage with a tarp. There's a story there. And she keeps leaving these little hints and you're like, oh, okay, going into his garage with a tarp. Like, maybe something's going to happen. And then it's just like, he's painting. Ha! He had a tarp because he was painting. And after a couple of times, you're like, what is the point of this book? Like, you almost start hoping he's a mass murderer because you're like, okay, well then at least something happens and that'll be interesting. Like, oh, wow, she's going to crack the case. And then he's just not. He's just a really nice guy who painted his house and had red paint on him. It wasn't even blood he was covered in. And you're kind of just like, that's, and then they fall in love. And I'm like, so how did your romance start? You making the assumption that he murders women? I don't know. There was just something about this book that I just didn't connect with, for multiple reasons. And I do have her new one, which is like with Love from Cold World. I am going to try to read it, but I just don't know if this is going to be an author for me. I think maybe if For Love from Cold World is another 2.5 read, somewhere in that arena, I probably won't continue with her writing because maybe her style is just not for me. On top of that, I'm not going to delve too far into this, but there was some kind of like woke language in this that when I'm reading, I'm trying to escape reality and escape stuff like that. If I'm not reading like a political thriller where I signed up for it, it turned me off. I was just kind of like, ugh. And it was thrown in places where there was no context and it didn't really make sense. And it was very much like, this guy is a man and all men have the potential to be killers and I'm going to make this assumption. And I'm just kind of like, okay. I don't know. Something about this just wasn't for me. 2.5 stars, perfectly average. I honestly thought about giving it a 2, but there were parts that I found entertaining. It wasn't horribly written. I just think stylistically, probably not my jam, but 2.5 stars. Moving on. So after that, I picked up The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller and gave this a 4.5 stars. This book is so cool. The whole concept was really cool. I really, really liked it. The way I would describe this is like fantasy Bachelor. Like, if you imagined The Bachelor, but add like magical, like otherworldly, mystical elements in a castle environment, that's this book. So the other thing that was really cool about this book, it makes it hard to describe, is I'm not entirely sure what the time period was supposed to be in this book. It blurred the lines of generation a little bit because it does have this kind of like medieval vibe of being in this castle with this king. And sometimes the way they talk is a bit like old world-y. But then there's elements of this that are very, very modern. They have electricity. That some people choose to use candlelight, but the castle is wired for electricity. And they make some, like, they still sit in sitting rooms and crochet and make their own clothes, but then they do make some very modern statements. So I really found that actually kind of cool, trying to like line up in my brain when this time period was and when this was supposed to happen. And I think by the end of the book, I just realized I think we're not supposed to know. Like, I think it does straddle the lines of like medieval kind of gothic modernism. Like, I think you're supposed to like almost create your own blend of time periods when you're reading this, and it ended up being very intriguing and cool, and that was something you were trying to figure out while you were reading, and I liked it. So basically what this book is about, I once again have to look up her name, because once I finish a book, the names just go out of my brain. Like, I can remember the general concept, but Oriah, Feyre, Phoebe, that stuff, gone. All gone. So this is about Alessandra. So this is about Alessandra, and she basically is from a family who is losing their wealth or has lost their wealth. So what happens is her father needs to secure a profitable, advantageous marriage for his daughter to continue his family's success. And basically what Alessandra starts doing is saying, like, why would I go and marry like a viscount or someone of lower station when I could just go straight for the king? And basically what the king does is he holds this ball where you can bring your eligible bachelorettes, like your eligible daughters, your eligible women in your family seeking marriage, and try to impress the king and ask him and get him to ask you to join their court, and then he can select a wife if he wants to. And Alessandra basically sets her sights on going to this, what is it, like an interview? Like going and meeting the king and impressing him to join the court and marry him. However, the trick to the story is she is not interested in being some wife for the rest of her life. She is power hungry, and she wants to woo the king, marry him, and then kill him so she can take over the kingdom as queen. And how the story goes from there, the king does, I mean, it's the Shadow King. He has some sort of like vampiric elements, but he's not a vampire. He just has like these shadows that follow him, and you get the story of his life and why. This book is so good. So good. The writing is amazing. The banter is amazing. The characters are amazing. And it does something that's one of my favorite things that books do, which is incorporate mixed media. So there's letters that you read throughout here. There's dialogue, and it's so good. And another book where there is little to no world building, easy to understand, really cool time period, really cool characters. And I saw some criticism on this book that people didn't love the ending. I loved the ending. I really liked it. They were like, oh, the ending leaves me unsatisfied. Not me. I liked it. And I'm really hoping there's going to be a second book in this series. I'm going to have to look up if there is, because I'm absolutely going to pick it up and read it. So I highly suggest this. 4.5 stars. So for some reason, my card stopped recording. I'm not sure why, but so that's it, guys. That was my books for the month of September. I had a pretty solid reading month. I'm really happy with that. And I feel like I did read, one mediocre book, but I found a couple of really good reads that I really enjoyed. Overall, a super positive experience reading this month. I know this book # shitty YouTuber. I know this video is a little bit short, but there is a reason for that. So I am basically going to be spending the next 10 days or so pre-filming a bunch of videos because at the end of October, I am going on vacation for 2 weeks and I really want to bring you guys with me, but that means I need to have some videos filmed and edited and scheduled to upload so that for that 2 weeks that I'm gone, I can just focus on filming and editing and getting those up. So the videos may end up being a little bit shorter so that I am pre-filming and not overwhelming myself. I hope you're okay with that, but thanks for joining along on this video. Do all the YouTube-y things, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me if you've read any of these books, or if you haven't, tell me what your favorite book that you read in the month of September was so that maybe I can prioritize it for my next month. And I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.